Good morning, everyone. I'm Crispin Turner. I'm the Commercial Product Marketing Manager for Goodyear Dunlop. Obviously, this session is going to be about total cost of ownership, and what I've tried to do is not effectively sell the product, but I've used tyres as an example really to take you through how we look at total cost of ownership. In terms of what we're going to be going through in a second, it's going to be the total cost of ownership as a concept. I'm just going to introduce you to it. I'm then going to look at sort of a traditional approach of purchasing tyres, basically, and then some facts, basically that may change your mind as to why really you should be looking at total cost of ownership. I'm also then going to touch on some fuel efficiency trials that we've been doing, and some comparison, and then we'll sum it up at the end. Can I just sort of ask really, how many of you at the moment look at everything in regards to total cost of ownership, or do you go down the traditional approach? Bit of both? Okay. Well, basically when we look at total cost of ownership, we're looking at the cost associated to the product beyond the actual purchase price initially. And what we always find is when we go into a customer, you're speaking to them, they say yes, your tyres are more than £20, £30 more expensive than your competitor. Now actually, while they're correct at the headline price, when you actually factor in all the different costs associated to tyres, we work out significantly lower on cost. And I'm going to show you why that is in a second. So the traditional way that people purchase is price. And in relative to tyres, it's basically, do you go for premium, do you go for value, or do you go for budget? And then the other option is new versus retread. And then you specify your tyres based on application. And that's what, sort of 10 years ago, it was the only method that people really selected tyres by. But just look at these facts as a bit of thought provocation. Tyres, the actual tyre itself that's on the vehicle only accounts for 4% of your operating costs. Yet up to 25% of the tractor unit or the truck's fuel consumption is influenced by its tyres. And the difference between an A-rated and a G-rated tyre is 30% on fuel consumption. So while almost, should we say, a G-rated tyre may be 20% less, what you're actually doing is basically making yourself 10% less profitable because your fuel efficiency is worse. And another one, and this comes more to the service side of tyres, 1 psi below the recommended level for your operation will increase your fuel consumption by 5%. So if there's not a bigger incentive to keep your tyre pressures at the optimum levels, it's that. So in terms of total cost of ownership and how we help customers approach it, it's effectively as your traditional approach. So you go through the premium, the value, the budget, what application you're doing, but then you factor into account a number of different areas. Now these are actually not everything, but they're the main ones. So for instance, mileage. How much more mileage will you get out of a premium tyre than you will out of a value tyre? Because actually usually it's a false economy. Fuel efficiency is a massive one. You look at some of the fuel bills from the big fleets in the UK, they're £100 million each. And 1% may not sound much, but when you actually convert it into fuel figures, that's suddenly you've got £1 million saving. There's also retreading and regrooving. A lot of tyres, for instance, you can't actually retread and regroove, and what that enables you to do is get 4 lives out of a tyre. So again, you may have a £50-80 difference between a premium and a budget tyre, but you can't actually regroove or retread it. So actually when you look at the overall cost, it's actually better going for a premium. There's also casing values. Effectively, once a tyre has run out, there is a value associated to the tyre at the end of its life because it gets retreaded. And often with a lot of the value brands, you can't actually do that. So that's another consideration to take into account. And I think the other thing that comes back to what I mentioned a minute ago about tyre pressures and the effect 1 psi below recommended level does to fuel consumption is service and service offering. Just looking at downtime costs, when we have windows that a lot of the operators have to get into for Tesco's and the like, there is a cost if you don't meet that, and that can be thousands of pounds sometimes. So, because you may have had a puncture or whatever. So, when you factor those types of costs into it, it makes usually premium a lot cheaper to go down the route of. So in terms of fuel, there are thousands of trials that everybody is conducting out there for their own operations. But what we do find is that often they're not actually taking into account all the factors. An example being, I went into a customer about a year ago and we were talking about fuel efficiency, and they were comparing our tyres versus a competitor's. And they said, yes, we're doing all the fuel efficiency, and they showed us all the figures on a screen. And all they were literally comparing were the tyres. So when we started saying, well, what's the load on those tractor units and trailers, they were like, well, we don't measure that. I'm like, well, that's a massive impact on your fuel efficiency. What about, aerodynamics between the vehicles and the loads that you're carrying? Well, they weren't taking that into account. Drivers, the difference between drivers can be massive. If one's got a very heavy foot and the other one's very conservative, you're going to have a huge impact. So we've actually been conducting a number of fuel trials with household fleets. And what we do is we use what we call a black box technology. And this black box technology basically takes into account all those factors. So it can measure the load being towed every day, every hour, even when you're dropping off, it will take that into account. It also factors into account the aerodynamics of the vehicle and the trailer. It can measure the differences between different drivers. Also the speed that you're going. Obviously, if you're coasting or you're going on A roads or B roads. The road type, the topography, that's a massive one. If you're going up in Scotland and up into the Pennines area, you're going to get massive different and variations in fuel efficiency just from doing that as compared to, should we say, running around Lincolnshire. Weather conditions, they have a massive impact, as do tail and headwinds. And then the other factor to take into account is when you're idling, effectively the tyre is not contributing to fuel efficiency, or the opposite. So all those factors need to be taken into account. I guess I'm not here to preach about our product, but we have, as verified by the TUV, the industry-leading fuel efficiency tyre, which is our FuelMax. Now that was something that we developed just over 2 years ago at our innovation centre in Luxembourg, and we verified it against all the competitors. But I think the reason I highlight this is because there's a lot of claims made out there by manufacturers, but I think there needs to be as much credibility around it. And we took a very strategic approach that we obviously verified it using our own testing methods, but then we got TUV and to test it, so it was completely independent. That's a test that cost over £1 million to do, but such was its importance for us, is why we wanted it to be done. And then really the third part of it is proving it in the field. So we have been testing the tyre against competitors with 2 of the UK's largest fleets. I'm afraid I'm not able to divulge who that is because they've asked us not to. But effectively it was FuelMax versus our closest competitor. And just to give you an indication of what that involved, we basically monitored 2 trucks. And we had our tyres on one truck, and then we had the competitors on another truck. And then what we do to eliminate any differences between the vehicles, we actually swap the tyres across on the vehicles to make sure that they, should we say, that the comparison is fair. And then what we go to, this FMS is basically the measured consumption of what happened. Now that's what you would get from your telematics, okay? And that effectively what we were getting from reading from telematics was exactly what the operators had on their screens as well. But then what we have to do is eliminate standstill, PTO use and manoeuvring consumption, because that's not something that is influenced by the tyres. And we get what we call a calculated consumption. And as you can see, there's about a 0.7 litre difference. But then on top of that, we then have to take in all those factors that I've just been talking about, and what we get is what we call an adjusted. And as you can see, Goodyear came out 1.9 litres better than the leading competitor per 100 kilometres. Now when you factor that into account, that's bear in mind just on one truck, that's saving over 2,850 litres of fuel a year based on the average of about 150,000 kilometres. And that's versus our nearest competitor. When you look at it in relative to other competitors, it's shocking. But then multiply that figure by your price of fuel, and then multiply it by the number you have in your fleet, you'll suddenly get some significant savings. So really, in summary, what I hope I've sort of demonstrated is we like, and is our approach with our customers. We always like to go and look beyond effectively the headline price and consider the wider cost in your operation. But it's also about making sure that we get the correct package and the correct product and the correct service offering for your operation as well. My other advice is just to ensure that the testing and trials are robust, because often we find it's not, and then when we go in and do our own black box testing with them, our customers, we usually find we get very different results. And I think really the end point is that any fleet that adopts a TCO policy will always be more profitable than the competitors. Thank you very much.